You know what's awkward? Someone lending you a book and you don't get around to reading it for like 2 years. You know what's even awkwarder? Not liking it very much. So this is what I sort of call a thick book, in that I'm sure it's very, very clever, but I myself am too thick to understand it. It sort of reminds me of things like Virginia Woolf or Ford Madox Ford. I've read books by both of them. Didn't like them. Found them a bit too. I don't know. I just thought they were a bit silly. Iain Banks, I think, is quite famous as an author. I think in the sci-fi genre especially, which I can believe reading this. This is, I think, his second book, so it's quite early on. He's written tons of books. This is... It's difficult to say what it's about, really, because nothing much happens in it. It follows three characters. There's Graham Park, who is in love with someone and he's walking to her house. That's most of his plot. There's Stephen Grout, who was a construction worker who is very, very paranoid, and he just sort of does stuff. And then there is a guy whose name I want to pronounce Quiz, but when I say it, I feel like I'm saying Chris with a lisp. So I don't know. Who is a war criminal from an intergalactic war, playing impossible games in some crumbling old castle. These storylines don't all happen at the same time. They're sort of, it's like three stories smushed together. And the blurb says, but their separate courses are set for collision. They don't really collide, if I'm honest. I don't think that's a spoiler. Or maybe it is. I don't know. It annoyed me. Right, so this is one of those books I really struggle to talk about because it almost makes sense to me. It's almost there, but then I feel like if you just tug a little bit too hard at the strings, it doesn't really stay together all that well. That being said, I do have a lot of good things to say about it. So let's go into that. So the biggest pro of the book, I suppose, are the scenes with Quiz, because it's just the best storyline. It's the only one that seems to have any agency and any sort of goals. So Quiz is in this crumbling castle, well, you don't know where it is, with another person called Ajayi. I don't know how you pronounce half these names. And they are playing impossible games. There's like, I can't remember, 1 or 3 dimensional chess. I'll read the games out because they've got great titles. 1-dimensional chess, open plan Go, spotless dominoes, Chinese Scrabble, and tunnel, which is like bridge, but all the cards are blank. And they're playing these games, and if they manage to complete the game, they get one chance to answer a riddle. And if they get the riddle correct, they are free. And if they fail, if they get it wrong, they have to play another stupid game. And these sections are by far the best. They are the best described. It's the best setting. This castle is almost like Gormengastian castle. It's great because it's full of mystery. You don't really know where it is. No one seems to live there apart from these two war criminals. And these little minion things that like sort of live in the kitchen and cook food for everyone. And they're like bundles of clothes. They seem to just be made of clothes. And there's also the person in charge of the castle who is a seneschal? I don't know how you pronounce that. I should have looked this up. Oh well. A guy in charge of the castle. And Quiz actually has agency. He's trying to find out where the castle is and what's going on and why these little guys are cooking so much food when there's only really 2 of them or 3 of them who need feeding. It's also rather cruel, but in a very entertaining way, all these absolutely ridiculous games like spotless dominoes. They've just got to put down tiles and hope they make sense when the spots appear in them at the end. Chinese Scrabble. So they're not from Earth, they're from some other planet. So the character Ajayi actually has to learn Chinese in order to play Chinese Scrabble, and then has to teach him some of the basics so he can do some simple words with his tiles. It's very clever. Although I have to say I didn't like Chris's character very much. I found him unreasonably angry and cruel, but I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. It's just a personal I didn't like him. But Ajayi was great. I think she should have been mentioned in the blurb, because she's a main character and she has POV sections, but the blurbs, it's only 3 men, so I don't know. I like the structure. The structure was very good. It's quite pleasing. So it's sort of split into several parts, and each part is made of 3 chapters. And the first chapter is always Graham Park, the second chapter is always Stephen Grout, and the third chapter is always Chris and Jay. So that's just nice, because you sort of know where it's going. Consistent. I also really like the chapter names. So the names are always, or the titles are always named after sort of an obstacle of sorts. So Graham Park's chapters are always named after streets in London, and it's always a street he's walking along when he's reminiscing about whatever event he shared with the girl he likes. Stephen Grout's chapter titles are always named after people, because he seems to suffer from anxiety, and so these people are sort of obstacles he has to overcome to get to the next chapter. And of course, with Chris and Ajayi, the titles are the games, which are obviously keeping them trapped in the castle. So I thought that was quite clever. It's got good pacing, which is surprising considering nothing really happens to 2 of the characters for a very long time. They just sort of do stuff. I liked Ajayi as a character. I also really liked another character called Richard Slater, who is Graham Park's friend. He's really eccentric. He sort of writes silly sci-fi stories in his free time. He makes rude pencil sharpness. He wears like light up red bow ties and like cool aircraft trousers where you can take the bottom bit off so you can have your boots on, and then put them on again so you can blend into normal people if you've crashed or something. He's also like so eccentrically gay. He's got like a new boyfriend every other week, but I don't know, it's written in quite a nice way. Like, you really like him as a character, so I enjoyed when he popped up. He's always great fun. Which is, possibly just because Graham Park, by comparison, has no character. So it was sort of a nice that, sometimes there's interesting people in his sections. Which I think leads me onto stuff that I didn't think was so great. But considering at least a third of the book I thought was really good, that's good going. It's nearly a good book. So, having sung the praises of Ajayi and Richard Slater, and in a way Chris, because he did have agency, he just was a bit unlikable, but he was a well put together character. Graham and Grout were lacking somewhat. So Graham Park, I didn't mind his sections at first, but reflecting on that, I realised it's because his sections were sort of a romance, and I like romance. It's a safe genre because I know what's going to happen. But when looking back, he didn't really have any character or personality. His entire identity seemed to revolve around this girl he was in love with, Sarah Fitch. To the point that if you took Sarah Fitch out, I don't know who he'd be, and that's just generally a kind of concerning thing with a character, if they seem to revolve purely around another character, especially when he's one of the main characters. And I mean, that could have worked. I think most things in literature can work if done right, and I think Graham being identified only by Sarah could have been okay if the ending had supported it, but it didn't. I'll have to get onto that a bit later. But and Stephen Grout, so he's paranoid and it seems quite anxious. Like, he talked about these microwave rays that make him get like sweaty palms and the shivers, and he's just generally nervous when he's like talking to people of authority or waiting to be served in the bar, which to me sound like anxiety, because I get nervous talking to people and waiting in. But I would get nervous if I ever went to bars, but I don't. But I can imagine I would. But he just, I don't know, it seemed a bit two-dimensional, like he was just this paranoia and nothing much else, which is a sad way to represent mental health. There was also a review I read on Goodreads that seemed to imply that it didn't really sound like real issues, not real issues, but like real life versions of like paranoia and stuff. But I don't know much about it, so I also just didn't like him. In the opening it revealed he like attacked a cat with a shovel, and I always get upset when cats get hurt because I like cats, and also cats never get sympathy when they get hurt in films. If a dog dies, it's tragic. If a cat dies, it's either comedy or it's like just dramatic. We need more tragic cat films, okay? Yeah. With Chris and Ajay, I liked them, but they didn't seem affected by their war crimes. So they're both actually on opposing sides of this intergalactic war, which is quite interesting, but that doesn't get brought up either. But yeah, that could work. But neither of them seemed particularly affected by what they did, and both of the accidents are, I imagine, things that would be quite traumatic for anyone involved. And I almost want them to suffer something like PTSD or just guilt or something, but they don't. So I would have liked that. The prose was fine for the most part, but it was a bit dull in places, especially when describing Graham Park and Stephen Grout's sections. You can sort of tell that the author was more invested in Ajayi and Chris's chapters, because they just feel a lot more lively and more interestingly described. I suppose the castle's a more interesting setting to describe compared to like London streets. But it was just a little bit bland. And the descriptions were a bit tired and used for Graham and Stephen. But he is considered to be a great writer, and this is quite an early book, so I imagine it's just sort of growing pains, and I think his later books are meant to be very, very good. I've got another one, I've not read it yet though. So I would put that down to just not grown into his style yet. The biggest problem I had though was the ending. I did not like the ending, but obviously if I said that now, you're not going to get what I mean. So let's go into actually what happened in the book and why therefore the ending did not work for me. So, again, this is quite a difficult book to describe the plot of, because nothing really happens for a long time. So I'll go through each story individually, because they are quite separate. So we'll start with... I'm looking down, I've got my notes because I forget things otherwise. So Graham Park, who is in love with Sarah Fitch, and he's walking to her house. While he's walking, he thinks about the times they've shared together, like the party they met at, where she went into a bedroom with him and then went to the toilet because she felt sick and didn't come out for ages. And that picnic they went to, and that time that he was outside her house in the rain and thunder phoning her, and she was just ignoring him because she was scared of the thunder. And also that time he was talking to her outside, and she was leaning out a window, and then the window shut on her, and she was too proud to admit it, she was stuck, and he found it really funny. Like random memories like that, which is, I don't know, they're fine, but they're a bit, I suppose, rose tinted because he's in love with her. They're quite boring, but no, they do mean something. So Sarah Fitch is separated from her husband, who seems like a bit of a nasty piece of work. He doesn't let her play piano, which is mean. And so she's gone back to London, where she's from, I think, to, go to uni. Graham Park is an art student. He does, drawings. And I think Richard Slater's a literature student because he writes all his sci-fi stuff, I think. There's a PI that her husband has hired to, I suppose, dig up dirt on her to use in the divorce proceedings. And she appears to be dating a leather jacket wearing, motorbike riding guy called Bob Stock, which is a great name. Richard, when he crops up, never seems supportive of the relationship between Sarah and Graham, even though he's the one that instigated it by introducing him at the party, which is interesting, because he says it'll only end badly, because I know women suck. I don't think he said that. And it does end badly. Oh man, it's ending so silly. Okay. So Graham gets to her house and he shows her the drawings. They're all very lovely. But she reveals the entire truth about their relationship. She has been using him the entire time to throw the PIs off the scent of her and Bob Stock, so that the PI wouldn't know which one she was dating or who was who, and confuse him and stuff. And she'd been stringing Graham along the entire time, which obviously sucks. And this is why all those memories were so important, because a lot of those memories were times that she was having relations with Bob Stock and sort of using Graham to distract from it. For instance, when she went to the toilet at that party, she was not feeling sick. She was hooking up with Bob Stock on the bathroom floor. When he was phoning her and it was raining and thundering, she wasn't picking up, she was in bed with Bob Stock. And he was using the phone ringing to set a tempo. And the time that she was leaning out the window, and the window shone her. Yeah, she was wearing a t-shirt, but she wasn't wearing anything else. So, yeah, it's all a bit too much information. Graham was obviously upset. He has violent thoughts of attacking her, but then decides it's not worth it, and he sort of sods off. And he takes the drawings with him because she doesn't deserve them. But that's not all, because there's more to this weird story. Later on, there's a scene where she's in bed with Bob Stock. Nothing graphic. It's afterwards. And Bob Stock is not Bob Stock. Bob Stock does not exist. Bob Stock is actually Richard Slater. He's not as gay as I thought, apparently. But that's not it. So Bob Stock was a fictitious character made up by both of them to confuse both the PI and to keep Graham from actually being able to make a move. So Bob Stock would appear at key moments as well to kind of drive Graham away. And this was actually just either Sarah or Richard wearing the leather jacket and the helmet to... so both of them had worn it to kind of confuse Graham. But that's not all. Richard and Sarah are brother and sister. Yep, it's good old-fashioned incest. So that's that plotline. It's a bit OTT. Meanwhile, Stephen Grout. So he was a construction worker. He is called in to talk to his boss because he attacked a cat with a shovel, and the owner of the cat was obviously quite upset. I think the cat was very, very badly hurt. He said he hacked it to bits with the shovel. But I've decided the cat was okay. The cat ran away mostly intact because it's a cat and they're pretty good at running away, and they're quite hardy creatures. Also, later on, I think there's a good reason that the cat was okay. The boss is always trying to fire him, but Grout pulls the whole "you can't fire me because I quit" thing and leaves without his P45 because he thinks they're confusing him by asking him to take it. But he's got his pay, so that's fine. He goes to the benefits office to sign up for unemployment, except he can't because he doesn't have his P45. He goes to the place he rents, and the landlady wants to vacuum his room, but he doesn't want her to because his room is full of sci-fi books. So many, he sort of built a maze with sort of paths from the door to the bed and the bed to the table and stuff like that. So then it's his birthday, he realises, so he goes to the pub and he meets some guy whose name I don't remember because he's not important, and then he goes to the park with his new friend so they can drink cider from the off licence, and then the new friend ends up stealing all his stuff, including his money and his favourite helmet, because he wears helmets to protect from them. And in pursuit of trying to find the guy who nicked his stuff, he ends up next to some traffic accident, and a barrel of beer, I think, rolls off a truck and hits him in the head, and he ends up in hospital with amnesia. I think he specifically got the one where he can no longer make short-term memories, so he just can't remember anything. And so he ends up in a sort of rehab centre, which he's never going to get out of because he just can't form memories quick enough to really be reinstated into society. So that's what happens to him sort of physically. Mentally, he's got this paranoia. He refers to a group he calls them. I think he also calls them tormentors, which I keep reading as dementors, which confused me. So he thinks they shoot like microwave rays at him every time he gets, and that's why he gets anxious. He thinks that they shoot something from the hubcaps of moving cars. Do you call them hubcaps in the UK? I don't know. That sounds quite American, but I don't know what you call them otherwise. I don't do cars. So when he walks on the pavement, he does not walk on cracks. He avoids the cracks. And he likes walking with a parked car between him and the road, because the parked cars shield him from the evil rays. The most interesting thing is that he thinks he was part of an intergalactic war, like an admiral or a lieutenant or something, and that he has fallen to Earth as a punishment, and that he needs to find the key that will help him return to the greater reality. And that's why he's got these sci-fi books, because he thinks he might find the answer in one of them. He also steals hood ornaments from cars for reasons. He pours sugar in like the motorcycle exhaust pipes, which is how this story plays into Graham Parks, because Bob Stock was meant to turn up at Sarah Fitch's house to get rid of Graham, but because his motorcycle had been tampered with by Stephen Grout, the motorcycle won't start, so he isn't able to get to the house in time. So yeah, his section ends in the rehab centre, and he sort of spends his time. He steals like playing pieces from board games from a couple who like playing them outside, so he annoys them. He finds various things like a matchbox that has a riddle on it. And he likes listening to the crows in this old like railway tunnel, and he listens to the crows and they seem to be cawing his name. So that's what he does. Ajayi and Quiss, so the war criminals in some castle, don't know where it is. So the war crimes they committed, let's go with that first. Ajayi was with a general or someone important. I think they're out like a desert somewhere, like trying to get back to somewhere. And he had hurt himself, so she was trying to give first aid. She told him to bite down on a bullet, because that's what you do, isn't it? Bite down so it makes you scream or whatever, or break your teeth. I think that's it, isn't it? But she realises a second too late that she gave him not a normal bullet, but an exploding bullet. And he quickly doesn't need first aid anymore. The Quiz, I've remembered a little bit less, but I recall he was I think it was like a guard, where a prince, I think, was going somewhere to, I think, possibly sign a treaty or do something important. I can't remember the exact details. But he, like, slips, I think, and, like, nearly falls off, and then he shoots downwards to propel himself back up or something like that. He shoots downward for some reason. and realises he's actually shot the prince. So that was awkward. So because of these transgressions, they've both been shoved in this castle to play stupid games. Now the castle section takes a very, very long time because each game takes like months to complete because they don't know if half the time they don't even know if they're playing it correctly, like the spotless dominoes and the tunnel. Also, it's just a pretty terrible environment. They have to play in this games room because there's a special table with like a red jewel in the middle or something. The games room is always really, really hot in the summer and really, really, really cold in the winter because the castle's heating room is never working correctly. So either it's not working at all or it seems to be working all the time. So they're always just uncomfortable. The food is always just tepid rather than warm. Or cold, I suppose it's meant to be cold. There's also this red crow that like comes to annoy them and mock them and like swear at them and stuff. It also tells them to kill themselves quite a lot, which is cheerful. So when they're not playing games, because that gets really boring, they explore things. Ajayi begins reading a load of books. There's tons of books in the castle, and she begins search through them to learn the old languages. And you realise that the languages in the books are things like English and Chinese, so they're actually like Earth languages, which implies the castle's probably on Earth, or what's left of the Earth at this point. And Quiz explores the castle, which is how he kind of sort of befriends the minions, except not really, because he like threatens them and legit murdered one because he kept pulling it apart to see what it was made of, and he's got more clothes, and he was left with a pile of clothes which like began to smell like rotten after a while, so R.I.P. that guy, I suppose. He ends up finding this special room wherein there is a hole in the ceiling and a stool under it, and he stands on the stool and he sticks a head in the ceiling, and there's also a lot of lights, and he enters one of the lights and he finds himself in the body of a peasant woman harvesting like potatoes or something. So it's like a way that those in the castle can live another person's life. Although the minions then kind of find him and kick him out, and he never finds the room unlocked again, so he's not allowed to go back into it. Later the crow takes him outside the castle, and it's just like this vast row of all these stools, and there's people with their heads stuck in holes in the ceiling or wherever. Like floating buckets is what I'm imagining, but I don't think that's what it is. And they're all just living the life of someone else because there's nothing else to do. And the crow says, when you just fail to answer the riddle and you give up, this is what's waiting for you. You're just going to sit on a stool all day and not live your own life. Again, the crow tells him that he should just kill himself because that's the easiest way. So the next game that they win is bridge. Quiz. So they're set with the riddle. The riddle, by the way, is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And the answers can't be theoretical. They've got to be like practical answers. And they give answers such as, I think I've written down somewhere. You can't have both in the same universe. The immovable object loses because force always wins. They both disappear in a blaze of radiation. And there's no such thing as either. And so when they are given a fifth time to answer, they don't know what to answer. Quiz tries to jump off the balcony, but Ajayi stops him. In his anger, he throws the table over, breaking the legs of the table, which are revealed to contain more books. Those books are Titus Grown, The Castle, The Trial, and Labyrinths, and a fifth book that is missing its title page. I think all these books are meant to be quite like thematic. I've only read Titus Grown, that being the first in the Gormenghast trilogy, and I think I did describe the cast as being quite Gormenghastian, which I don't think is a word, but it should be. I imagine the other books are thematic. So Ajayi picks up the mysterious fifth book and reads the first page, which says, "He walked through white corridors." And guess how this book begins? He walked through white corridors. So it's this book, which, I don't know, it's a bit of a paradox. I can't quite get my head around that. Although it's good, though, because it means she's going to find the answer to the riddle, because the matchbox that Grout finds in rehab has this riddle on it: what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? The answer of which is, of course, the unstoppable force stops, the immovable object moves. How did you not get that? So that's how that bit ends. The final part of the book is returning to Graham Park after he's stormed out of Sarah Fitch's house. He walks along the canal where he finds a torn up lad mag and a small furry leg, which is presumably of the cat, which is why I think the cat was okay, because it was only a leg that was found. Like, the rest of the cat would still be there if it had died. And if they were cleaned up, they wouldn't have just left the leg. So the cat's okay. It's just his leg's gone chopped off. And Graham sadly thinks about how billions of years of evolution has resulted in a civilization that can be summed up by the rotting leg and the dirty magazine, sex and violence. He looks at the pictures of Sarah he's drawn, decides they're his best work ever, and then throws them into the canal along with the magazine and the cat leg, and watches them all drift away. And then he walks back to the city. The end. That is how it ends. I did not care for the ending. So let's go into why I didn't like the ending. So, the ending. Now, I'm not saying all books have to end with everything all neatly tied up in a fancy bow. There are plenty of books out there which end, a little more openly, and that's fine. Books like Gargoyle, Fahrenheit 451, I, Lucifer, The Woman in Black, arguably. They all didn't end neatly, but that wasn't a problem, because they weren't books which needed a neat ending or explanation. The problem with Walking on Glass is that it feels like it lied. The blurb says that the three storylines will converge, but they just don't. At least, not in any tangible way. Graham's story doesn't collide with Chris's in any way, and it only really ties in with Grout through the sugar and the motorcycle exhaust pipes. And there are similarities between Chris and Grout, but they don't really mean or explain anything. And they don't really link them either. So there's the riddle, but how does the riddle get from Grout to Quiz? Or how do Grout to the Seneschal? Then there's the couple playing the board games with the pieces missing, but the couple aren't Quiz and Ajayi, so they're just random people who happen to be similar. There are the crows. Grout thinks he was in a war, but and fell from some high reality, but we don't know if that's true or not. It could be one of the castle's inhabitants in his head, but there aren't really any concrete or even slightly concrete clues that might draw us to that conclusion. That's just me scrabbling at straws trying to explain it. It just doesn't converge in a tangible way, and that's disappointing. Unless I'm missing something really, really obvious, which is very possible. I also just didn't really care for the untitled book that Ajayi finds being this book. It always feels a little bit narcissistic to me to sort of self-reference like that. It also didn't seem to fit with the other books she finds in the games table. I've only really read Titus Grown, which is the first Gormenghast book, and The Trial, I think, is the one by Kafka. And Gormenghast has all these imagery of castles and secrets and stuff like that, which fits in very well with the themes of the games castle. I imagine the other books do too, but I don't really see how this book would fit in with those themes, especially Grout and Graham Park. Well, they've got to deal with him castle. It's a lovesick teenager being an idiot. And I don't think that Iain Banks would necessarily disagree with my opinions on that. He said in an interview for Starburst magazine, which is like a sci-fi magazine, he said that the book didn't do exactly what it set out to do, and I think you have failed to an extent if the reader can't understand what you're saying. I worry sometimes that people will read Walking on Glass and think in some way I was trying to fool them, which I wasn't. So I think he realises that it doesn't quite do what it's meant to do, and that people aren't quite getting what he meant for them to get out of it. So if this book was put in front of me in a workshop setting, which does seem a little big-headed because Iain Banks is quite a famous author today, my main point would be about the ending and about making it more satisfying or meaningful. Although, if I'm honest, I would probably be inclined to actually cut out the 3 storyline element and just have it about Ajayi and Quiz, because that was the most exciting, interesting part of the book, and I feel like he might have written another book about that, but I could be wrong, I don't know. But if we had to keep the 3 storylines, here's what I'd say. First, rework the descriptions in the London-based chapters. Iain Banks can write description, but because it was so good in the sci-fi castle, it felt a little flat in the London bits, so that was disappointing. Second, I would think more about Graham Park's story and character, either give him more of an identity outside of Sarah Fitch, because he didn't seem to have one, or have that lack of identity being a main theme in his story. The commentary at the end about how society is sex and violence would have been fine if those themes had played more a part, but they don't really seem that important in the stories. The more obvious theme to me is the sense of reality and how different realities can exist simultaneously in different people's minds. So I would have tried to either bring that commentary into the story or change the commentary to match the story. They didn't seem to work together. Also would have taken out some of the twists because I sort of got mental whiplash from some of the reveals. I don't really know what Grouchsteel was. I don't know whether he was a lieutenant in the Intergalactic War or not. That's probably the point that you're not meant to know, but I still feel like more could have been done with it. I probably would have leant more into like a schizophrenia than a paranoia lens, I suppose. If indeed he does have a soldier in his head giving him the ideas about the war and a higher reality and stuff. Like maybe one of the machines in the cast is a default. Default? That's not what I mean. Defect, that's it, thank you. So, you know, I feel more been done with him. Quiz and Ajayi, I would have just liked more reaction to their war crimes. They're quite traumatic. And they don't really seem that bothered by them. They seem more embarrassed than anything, which might have been alright if that whole world and war had been more fleshed out, but because it's a third of the book rather than the whole book, they don't have time to do that, and so they just feel a bit inhuman when they don't really care. So I might have wanted them to be suffering sort of PTSD or at least some form of guilt or just something to make them seem a bit more human. And yeah, just more concrete ties between the 3 stories or the characters. It could be a story-related thing that unites them, like the seneschal is in Grout's head and that's where he gets the idea for the riddle and the impossible games. Or perhaps the 3 stories could have been linked through themes, and this book could have been more of an anthology than a novel with 3 different stories linked through just what they're trying to say about reality. So that's all I can think of to say. All in all, it's a book I wanted to like. I really wanted to like it. It just didn't do it for me in the end. But I'm clearly the minority with that. So I think if anything about this book has intrigued you, I'd go check it out. You probably get more out of it than I did. And if you did like it, I'd love to hear why, because something's got lost on me, obviously. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.